How did right-wing evangelicals in the United States come to see supporting the nation of Israel as a religious obligation? Given the recent rise in a military conflict in the Middle East, including the United States government's decision to bomb Iran in support of the government of Israel, it seems relevant to discuss how supporting Israel has become a core part of the American evangelical identity, because it's a lot more recent of a modern creation than you might expect. Now, I want to emphasize from the start that the U.S. involvement in the Middle East, and especially their relationship with the government of Israel, is an exceptionally difficult topic, which includes many, many layers. I'm not questioning Israel's right to self-defense or even their federal sovereignty. And while I'll be discussing the creation of Israel during the post-World War II era, I will not be digging into the multilateral and multi-consequential elements involved in those geopolitical discussions. Nor are the ideologies that I'm going to be discussing in this video totally representative of the U.S. support of this issue and the Israeli government. What I am wanting to unpack, however, is the religious motivation often offered by one of the largest segments of American defenders for Israel, right-wing evangelicals who make up a large contingent of the Republican Party in the United States today. Take, for instance, the Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who in his interview with Tucker Carlson just last week offered this defense for why he wanted to become America's biggest defender of Israel.
Growing up in Sunday school, I was taught from the Bible, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. And from my perspective, I want to be on the blessing side of things.
Now, Senator Cruz might appear quite confident there. That exuberance, that confidence is quite emblematic of right-wing evangelical support for Israel. However, look what happens when he's asked the very basic question of, where do you get this biblical support for the Israeli nation?
So that's in the Bible. As a Christian, I believe that.
Where is that?
I can find it to you. I don't have the scripture off the tip of my... You pull out the phone and use the Google.
It's in Genesis, but...
Now juxtapose the confidence of Ted Cruz saying that we need to bless Israel and that you're blessed when you support Israel, and his inability to identify a specific biblical passage in support of that. That's actually a perfect embodiment of the modern evangelical support for Israel, because it's based on these hazy, vague, but historically contingent alliances that were made in the last century, and especially are often hiding ideological, theological, doctrinal justifications that often don't come to the surface. That's what I want to dig into today. Let's dig in. By the way, if you appreciate this type of historical engagement with religion and politics and American history, please make sure to subscribe to this channel. Every Monday, I do deep dives on a particular historical topic. On Wednesday, I try to connect what's happening in modern day politics and culture and media with what has happened before. And on Fridays, I'm doing a series on, so you want to know more about X topic, in which I suggest other books and articles so that you can become an expert on these important historical subjects. So without all that out of the way, let's dig into the history. To understand the modern American evangelical support for Israel, you need to understand a theological dynamic and movement within the Christian tradition known as dispensationalism. This idea that the whole of history of humanity can be broken up into particular dispensations, and that you can know where we are in this development based on these bookmarks or hallmarks that have been given to signify the end of a dispensation, especially the coming of the millennium. A core part of that belief has been the role of Israel and the gathering of God's chosen elect back to the Holy Land. And there were American Christians all the way back to the nation's founding who had a vague sense of this. John Adams, who was far from an evangelical, he was more of a Unitarian Christian, even believed that it was going to be a fulfillment of biblical prophecy for the nation of Israel to be once again reestablished and the return of the Jewish people back to that land. So dispensationalists in general view Judaism and Zionism in particular with, at first, this much broader and vaguer outcomes, but it becomes much more precise in the early 20th century. Building off of the 19th century thinker John Nelson Darby, an Anglo-Irish theologian who is in many ways the modern father of Christian dispensationalism, American Christians then build off of that, especially with the growth of the fundamentalist and evangelical movement in the 20th century. And they try to more precisely define the terms of the signs of the second coming. And so this became a popular interpretation of the Bible, specifically reading modern day political, social, and cultural views into the scriptural text. This becomes popularized through the Scofield Study Bible, which became a key biblical text for fundamentalists in the early 20th century. And a primary component of this dispensationalist ideology is taking the book of Revelation seriously, specifically its prophecies of the end day. And this idea, this theological justification known as premillennialism, that the second coming could not arrive until there were all these geopolitical developments that took place in this world. The creation of Israel that would become a geopolitical power, the inauguration of a series of wars that are going to signify the end times, all finally culminating in these cosmic battles and the return of Jesus Christ. So when the geopolitical circumstances of the post-World War II era resulted in the creation of the Israeli nation, again, a very complicated and layered historical process that I'm not going to go into this video, this signified to many Christians across the globe, especially evangelicals in America, that this is the fruition of prophecy, that this creation of a new nation state was what had been prophesied in the book of Revelation and what was a crucial step in this new dispensation and the coming of of Christ's second coming to earth. So it gave American evangelicals a sacred calling in assisting this new Israeli nation at the very moment when America was becoming defined as a Christian nation. The 1950s is largely seen as the apotheosis of this ceremonial Christian identity that Kevin Cruz and other scholars have written about. And so by supporting Israel and seeing its significance on the global stage became a core part of this new evangelical identity, just as they were forming this religious right. It also allowed American evangelicals to separate supporting Judaism at home to supporting Israel abroad, which is why you see a lot of groups who do not like the Jewish people and hold anti-Semitic views being proud proponents of the creation of Israel. Some might see, how can you be anti-Semitic but also pro-Israel? Well, on 2 points. One, theologically, they saw the creation of Israel as a fulfillment of prophecy, and so you can support Israel while not supporting the Jews at home. And second, especially with the racist ethnic view of many white evangelicals in the mid-1900s, the creation of Israel was the example of the very type of ethnocentric state that they wanted to create. That's why the KKK, for instance, was very pro-Israel while also being anti-Jewish. And I want to emphasize again, this is not the perspective that all people take in supporting Judaism. There are many people who are not anti-Semitic and are supporting Israel, in other words. But this does play a large role in the American evangelical worldview. This modern iteration of evangelical Zionism is captured in the growth of fundamentalist literature, especially in the late 20th century. Think of Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins' popular series, The Left Behind, books from the 1990s that were then turned into movies in the early 2000s that popularized this apocalyptic vision that supporting Israel, the creation of this Israel nation state, was a key point in the coming of these cataclysmic wars that would then inaugurate the second coming. That is why it becomes a central point in the new religious right coalition, the moral majority, in which evangelicals make up a core part of the Republican Party, that supporting Israel was a central theological priority. That's how it becomes so crucial for the Republican Party, because their core evangelical base demanded it on religious grounds, and it becomes a central piece of the broader culture wars rhetoric. Now, I know a lot of people who come to my channel are expecting Mormon history content, since I do a lot of videos on Mormon history, so I thought I'd tie in how Mormons fit into this broader evangelical view of Zionism. From the very beginning, Mormons bought into this broader story of Christians seeing a return of the Jewish people to the Holy Land as a sign of the second coming. Joseph Smith himself assigns an apostle, Orson Hyde, to travel to Jerusalem, where he goes on the Mount of Olives and dedicates the land for the return of the house of Israel. Just set aside the temerity of that. The Mormons are the ones that are finally going to inaugurate Jews returning to the house of Israel. But that ideology remains at the center of their apocalyptic quasi-dispensationalist view. And the Mormon view of dispensations is unique from, but similar to, the evangelical dispensationalism. Then in the 20th century, that view of Israel becomes a political idea for many Mormons, just like it does for many evangelicals. A great example is found in the case of David O. McKay, who was an apostle throughout the first half of the 20th century and then is the prophet in the 1950s and 1960s, who would frequently say that the creation of the house of Israel is not just a vindication of this long-held Christian belief, but a fulfillment of Book of Mormon prophecies that said the Jews would once return to the Holy Land. So reading this Zionism through a Book of Mormon lens, and further supporting Israel as a political issue, is one of, though far from the only, but one of the points that allow American Mormons to participate in the new religious right coalition. So in other words, supporting Israel was a way for American Mormons to prove their patriotic, Republican, and American bona fides. Now that I've overviewed some of the key historical points of development of the American evangelical support for Israel, I want to close with a few key takeaway messages. First, I want to reiterate that the support for Israel, including among Americans, is very dynamic and broad and complex, and I'm just talking about a small portion of it, and that these Middle East politics are far more layered than what these evangelical narratives often seem to indicate. Second, I think it's important to note that most evangelical support for Israel is not always for geopolitical concerns, these ideas of having a bulwark of democracy in the Middle East, but because it's theologically necessary to bring in the apocalyptic collapse that inaugurates the second coming. In other words, supporting Israel for many, though not all, of evangelicals is not about supporting the people who live in Israel. It's about their theological reading of the Bible and the end times, which is why they often equate supporting Israel with supporting Judaism, and why they might be much more likely to be in favor of what the Nation of Islam is doing than trying to carve out space for Jewish belonging in the United States. That's why the same people who could march at Charlottesville, Virginia, nearly a decade ago, who were chanting, "Jews will not replace us," remember that white supremacist rally, are also the same people who likely supported Israel, because that's how it works within their theological worldview. This is also why so many American Jews will speak out about this conflation with supporting Judaism, with supporting Israel. That means supporting the theological Jews abroad who are fulfilling prophecy, and the tangible, real, neighborly Jews who live at home. Again, this is a complicated issue, but I think it's important to tease back some of the superficial justifications that are given by some segment of Israeli supporters in America, the right-wing evangelicals, to try to decipher what is really behind their pledged allegiance to the nation of Israel. In other words, if Ted Cruz, one of the most powerful senators in the United States, is going to be proclaiming that we need to defend Israel based on biblical values, it's fair to at least ask him what verses he's referring to. I hope this made sense. Let me know if you have any questions or please additions in the comments. Please like and share the video if you find it useful, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. History has never been more important than it is right now because it gives context and meaning to all the crises that we're currently facing.